Made possible through support from ARC Thrift Stores, Colorado Developmental Disabilities Council, Developmental Pathways, the Limbaugh Law Firm, and the ARC of Aurora. A THINK+change training. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today as we are kind of closing up this journey talking about developmental disability and trauma. I am your host, Erica Dennison, joined by an external guest expert here today while we kind of close up this conversation on how to build a trauma-informed organization and mindset. And so you were with me for our last episode, but just in case someone's tuning in, could you care to share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you kind of align with this work?
Absolutely. I'm Laura McArthur. I'm one of the co-founders of Resilient Futures. At Resilient Futures, our mission is to cultivate radically inclusive, compassionate, and empowered communities through trauma-informed, equity-centered work designed to drive sustainable change, which is a long way of saying, being trauma-informed takes time. And so my background is in clinical psychology. I came to this work as a therapist, and really working in schools is what inspired me to move towards doing more systemic work around trauma-informed care.
That's fabulous. You're doing the important and good work in our community. Well, thank you for being here today with us. So my question for you is, what are the benefits of building trauma-informed organizations and mindset?
Yeah, so many benefits. First of all, I would say, trauma-informed community or organization takes care of all members of its community, so it really benefits everyone. Sometimes we think about the folks who have been most closely impacted by trauma as the people who benefit from a trauma-informed organization or community, but it's really all of us because we're all impacted. And so I think about the community you work with, folks with disabilities, they may experience traumas related to their disability, and then their parents or their family members may also experience that trauma of watching them go through that or having to go through some of those things themselves. And, trauma really does have kind of a ripple effect. And so does healing and resilience. So being a trauma-informed organization benefits everyone. And there are a lot of different ways, to kind of approach it. But the first way to approach it is mindset. So the mindset shift is really fundamental to making changes in your behavior, right? So a lot of times when I'm working with teachers in schools, which is where I spend a lot of my time, and we're working on that mindset shift of, that what's wrong with this kid to what's happened to this kid, for example. And then the teacher starts to build that awareness. Oh, this kid's been through some really hard things, and this is now showing up in my classroom as this type of behavior or this difficulty in learning. But now what? And so that awareness really leads us to different choices of how to behave and how to support each other in a trauma-informed organization. So it's both awareness and choice, but it really starts with that mindset shift.
That's great. And I think we all can certainly choose to do this, right? It's
Yes.
not, I don't think we're volunteering anyone to do so by any
Right.
means, but it certainly could be a really great benefit to so many different communities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. And so what would you say, how can someone start building awareness and buy-in for a trauma-informed approach specific to like their place of work?
Yeah. The place that we often start with new partners, whether it's a school organization or another type of community, is by understanding stress, because stress is really sort of the beginning part of understanding trauma, and everyone experiences stress. I will sometimes start a training by asking folks who's experienced some stress just this morning, right, on the way to this training, and nearly everyone, if not everyone, will raise their hand. So we know what stress feels like. We know what it does inside of us, and there's a lot to learn there about what it's doing to our bodies and how it can turn into something that we call trauma, right, over time. And so I think really starting with helping people understand their own stress response, understand how stress and trauma has impacted them, really does build that buy-in for understanding why trauma-informed practices then are so powerful and so doable, because it's for all of us. It's something that we can do for ourselves and each other.
That's wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
for the advice.
Yeah.
It's doable, right?
It is doable. Yeah. And it takes time. It can be counter to the way our systems work to take a trauma-informed and equity-centered approach. So to really center the folks who are most impacted is the way to do it, because then we all benefit from that. So if you think about someone, maybe someone with a disability who's been impacted by trauma, and if we center their experience and understand how what has happened to them has impacted them, and we put supports in place to really maybe build their resilience, like we talked about in the last episode, or really just support what they need to heal, everyone is going to benefit from that.
I agree. I agree completely. Yeah. And I think it really doesn't sound like it has to be hard. I hear that it can take time, but to just have that awareness and the mindset can really kind of start making that shift and to have that meaningful dialogue. Yeah. So we're talking about the question I just asked when it talks about, how can we build awareness at someone's place of work, but how can someone start to build awareness and buy-in for trauma-informed approaches just in their own lives?
Yeah, I think when you start to look at things through a trauma-informed lens, it really impacts how you see everyone. So even just driving on the highway and someone cuts you off, for me anyways, my quick response might be, what's wrong with that person, or how dare they, or, some other things that I won't say out loud on this interview. But a trauma-informed lens really slows that down. And it's like, wow, I wonder what's going on for them today. And I hope that everything's okay. It really does shift the way you take in data from the world around you. And hopefully it also shifts how you see and treat yourself, and understanding how stress and trauma have impacted you. When you have been irritable for days and days and lose your temper at your kid or your dog or your partner, right? And can stop and think about what's happening for me right now. And you start to think about, I'm going through this big thing in my life. This is happening at work. Oh, this is the anniversary of this traumatic event in my life, right? And then you start to have this understanding of like why you're feeling that way and why you're acting that way. And then you have different choices in front of you, right? Again, it's that awareness piece that really helps us see that there are other options in front of us rather than just kind of reacting. So often, what we see folks do, whether it's at home, in schools, or whatever context, is you just react to a behavior like someone cutting you off, right? And having some, kind of response to that. In schools, often it's discipline, right? Or demanding compliance.
Sure.
And we often ended up re-traumatizing people by responding in that way. So the trauma-informed mindset lets us stop and relate and reflect about what's going on. I mentioned in the last episode, a lot of healing happens through connection. And so really stopping and connecting with this person, maybe it's a kid in your classroom who's behaving in a way that is triggering you. Well, connect with that kid and reflect on, why is this triggering me? What is coming up for me when this behavior happens? And then you work towards, restoring that relationship and then maybe addressing and renewing some of the systemic practices that are in place that kind of keep that pattern going. So I think that, it really is just bringing that lens, that trauma-informed lens, that equity lens to the forefront over and over again that leads to change.
Absolutely. And I love your example of, the whole driving thing. I mean, I think that's like something that everyone can relate with. Right. And when you may want to react in certain ways, and we won't say all the ways right here, but I think even just taking that moment in any type of situation where you almost just want to react in some way, and just taking that step back to reflect, and say what happened to this person rather than what is wrong. What happened to make them cut me off? Maybe they have a family emergency, right? Or I think about even, in a situation where maybe you're at a grocery store or something like that, and someone is just not super kind to you, rather than being like, what is wrong with this person? Like, what happened? What happened to make them treat me the way that they did? And I think that is a really easy practice that someone can totally implement in their everyday life and thinking. Yeah.
And the other piece I would add to that then is really understanding your stress response. So we get triggered, our stress response gets triggered all day long, and we are not living in a world where fight or flight often works, to get through a situation that's causing you stress, right?
Sure.
We often have to kind of keep it inside and hold on to it until we have a chance later, hopefully, to process. And that's really important to know because our body's hanging on to that stress and it can build up over time. So we have to find ways. It's not like we're just sort of, and this is what teachers say, well, then I'm just letting this kid off the hook, right? And they're just getting away with it. And that's not the message of trauma-informed practices. But what's important to understand is this kid does trigger me and I am having a stress response throughout the day. And so I need to do something about that when I get home. I might need to exercise. I might need to laugh. I might need to cry. I might need to do something creative. I might need to spend some time connecting with a family member, partner. There are a lot of different ways that we can sort of discharge that stress that builds up throughout the day. And that's really important to understand if you're doing that trauma-informed work, because you are trying to meet people with grace and accountability, and also the same for yourself, right?
I think giving ourselves grace can be so hard.
Oh, it's so hard. Yeah.
It's so hard. But I often tell people to give yourself grace because we're all going through something in some way, shape, or form. And so those are really wonderful tips and advice that I think people can certainly leave here today with.
Yeah, I hope so. I think understanding that your stress builds up and there are things you can do to actually feel better, and understanding that other people are having stress responses too, right? And it's not about you, it's about what's happening for them.
Yeah. Awesome. So also, I think self-care, like you said, is important too. And I will admit that I am the first to not always do great self-care. I try my darndest, but life happens, right? And so I think definitely taking a step back and taking a moment to do that self-care and self-reflection can be so important.
It is. And, a book that really shifted things for me, it's called Burnout: Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And it's by two sisters, Amelia and Emily Nagoski, I think. And so they talk about how being well isn't just always being in this state of calm. Like, that is unrealistic, that we're always just going to be calm and happy. But being well is knowing that you can move in and out of those times of stress and frustration back into calm and peace, and in and out as your days and weeks go by, because you have this understanding of your stress cycle. You have this ability to unlock it and discharge the stress that's building up over time. And so it's important to understand, I think, for self-care, that it's not about like, okay, now I feel completely better. Sometimes that happens and that's great. But often it's about like, okay, I did what I needed to do, to communicate with my body that like I'm okay and I'm safe, because our bodies are what's, and our brain is like telling us throughout the day, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe, right? And then if we can really dig into that and understand, okay, this is my stress response and there are things I can do to let go of it, I'm more able to move fluidly between those states of stress and calm in life.
That's great.
And that really helps us when we're trying to support other people, right? So if you're a parent or a caregiver or a teacher, and you're trying to support kids or, people that you work with who've experienced a lot of stress and trauma, your own well-being is so tied up in that, it really is. And really, really important to prioritize your own wellness. Yeah. But to understand what that means.
Yeah. And to restore yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you for all those great tips and advice.
Yeah.
When we are, kind of closing up our conversation of this multi-part series, what are some resources to help people to build trauma-informed organizations and a mindset?
Yeah, I mentioned in the last one, Helping Traumatized Children Learn, which is a free PDF online. And there's a follow-up PDF that they've presented as well that you can download online that is all about systemic change. And so if you're looking for like a tool of like just kind of some starting points of like my parent group or the classroom that I support or, the after school program I work in, whatever it is, I think that's a really good resource. You can just look up Helping Traumatized Children Learn and that will pop up. And there are so many great books out there, but one that I really been thinking about a lot lately, especially for caregivers, is called Rest as Resistance. And I think so often we are, as nonprofit workers, teachers, parents, caregivers, support figures for other people, focused on other people's wellness as like, I want to do this trauma-informed thing for them, right? And that's great and really important. And it also really needs to be for us. And this book is written by Tricia Hersey, a Black woman who really breaks down how resting is actually one of the most powerful things we can do in our lives, for trauma-informed work, for racial equity work, for overall like well-being, and a way to challenge this grind culture that we're so accustomed to. And so I would also really recommend looking at that resource.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And we will link any resources that Laura just mentioned in our show notes. So we'll be sure to make that available to anyone who's tuning in. So,
and then I would also just add, we at Resilient Futures are also in partnership with a lot of schools and community organizations around Colorado in particular, and are always, excited to work with new partners and connect with people who are getting started in this work for some places to begin.
Wonderful. I mean, I can attest to the great work that they do within our local communities. So I'm really grateful that you were here as a resource, because you guys really do some wonderful work for our communities. And I think building community, as we kind of wrap this up, sounds to be so important. And we can really implement a lot of these approaches within our own personal everyday lives, whether that be in schools, parenting, thinking about criminal justice, healthcare, victimization services, maybe your disability organization that provides care. I mean, the sky's kind of the limit. And so, as we kind of wrap up this last episode, do you kind of have any closing thoughts for anyone who's tuning in?
I think just, to that point around wellness, I think remembering that this work is going to take time, and that it's sort of a long game, and at least systemically, I think, the internal shifts that we can make are really powerful and lead to those systemic shifts that we want to make as well. And so to really just kind of like you mentioned earlier, give yourself grace, and let yourself lead this work internally in a really authentic way, and find the partners that want to do the work with you. And other folks will come on board. We often see in schools or organizations that there are some people that jump on board right away, a few more folks that are slower to come along, and some folks that watch for a while before they get on board. And that's okay. But that's part of how that systemic change happens. So find your other champions, find your other partners in this work that are passionate and committed, and go from there.
That's great. I think also, just bringing people together, I think is also very healing.
Yes.
And so I love that you give that recommendation to find your partners, find the champions, find the people who are excited about this work, because really we can kind of dismantle trauma. It'll always exist, but we can certainly change the approach in which people are supporting people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome.
I love the advice that you shared with everyone tuning in. So thank you again for joining us for our final episode when we're talking about trauma and developmental disabilities. And we will continue to roll out contemplative and provocative content here through THINK+change. So be sure to tune in for our next series. It's going to be top secret. Not going to tell you what it is just yet, but we'll see you next time. And in the meantime, stay curious. Take care.